Hello and namaste to everybody. I hope you guys are doing well. So in this episode of On the Mic with Parth, we have a very special guest with us, somebody who I've been wanting to host and have a conversation since a very long time, and somebody who has personally impacted highly on my mountaineering career, on my mountaineering journey. He is the author of Training for the New Alpinism and Training for the Uphill Athlete. And for the people who are into climbing mountains, I'm sure you've heard of this book and you know now who I'm talking about. Yes, today's guest is Scott Johnston. He is a mountaineer, he is an author and an endurance coach. He is the founder of Evoke Endurance, and he has helped coach a lot of endurance athletes to climb mountains, to run races. And I mean, personally, if I talk about him, his book Training for the New Alpinism, which is right here, whenever there is some confusion related to training, that's the scripture I go to. And the science mentioned in this book, the philosophy mentioned in this book, the approach towards training for mountaineering and endurance sports has completely shifted the mindset and the way people train for climbing mountains. And he has been out there fully spreading education and spreading awareness about the right way, the right approach to climbing mountains. And I was one of those lucky people who was impacted by his approach and his book. And yes, in this conversation we spoke about a lot of topics, from endurance to strength to diet to mental resilience and to what happened in spring 2023, his approach on it, and so many other things. I mean, he is a powerhouse of knowledge. One podcast is just not enough to understand what he knows. And yes, without much further ado, I will let you guys get into this conversation. Enjoy. This is actually the first time I am a little nervous before having a conversation with somebody.
Don't be nervous with me. I think we should be able to have a great conversation.
So if you're ready, we can start.
Anytime, you bet.
Awesome. So hello and namaste, Scott. How are you doing?
Thank you, Parth. It's an honor to be on your talk show. I really appreciate it. I'm doing well, thanks. Very busy with work. Yes, I'm about to head to California to support one of the athletes I coach who's running in the Western States 100-mile race, which is quite a famous big race, ultra-distance race here in the US.
Right. Awesome. So before I shoot my questions at you, I just want to let you know and let the audience know about how your knowledge, and especially the book Training for the New Alpinism, has really shaped the way I climb mountains. When I first got introduced to climbing mountains back in 2010, I was just 15 years of age. I had no idea how to, train, or I had no idea that, people specially train for climbing mountains. So I just went about doing a few treks. And I think a few years later, I wanted to do a Himalayan trek. I met some expert who said to me that, oh, you want to climb mountains, you should be running. I'm like, okay. I started running. Just running, okay? Just running every day. 1 hour, 1.5 hour running every day. And in 6 months, I lost so much weight that I started getting sick almost twice in a month. And eventually, I spoke to a few people about what is happening, and some person recommended me your book, Training for the New Alpinism. And when I started reading that book, I would say it really changed my life in more ways than one, because for the first time, I realized that there is a science behind training for climbing mountains. And what I had been doing is absolute stupidity. And using your philosophy, the science that you have mentioned in that book, I was able to climb Everest using that. And since then, I have been using, the training plans that you have on your website. So first of all, wanted to thank you for all the work that you've been doing. You have no idea how many people you help climb mountains daily.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate it. That was surprising to me as well, to suddenly be helping all these people. I honestly thought that I would write that book and then just go back to my life. I didn't expect that it would have much impact. And I didn't really expect that it would change the way people viewed preparation for climbing these big mountains, but it has. And I'm very happy about that. I'm glad I could make a small contribution. I've also, it ended up starting a business for me essentially. So, which has kept me very busy now.
On Instagram this morning, I posted a story that I'm doing a podcast with you, and I got so many questions. And by looking at those questions, I kind of got an idea of what kind of questions that my audience wants, and they were very basic. So I have noted a few of them down. And one question which I want to start off with is, people don't know the difference between workout and training. So, in your perception, how would you explain somebody who is just doing gym workout every day versus somebody who is following a training routine?
That's a great question and a really good place to start, actually. Workouts, standalone, they kind of, you can take them out of context. I mean, they're exercise, and there's nothing wrong with exercise, but to put them together, to put a bunch of workouts together over a long term into kind of a coherent plan that takes you from a certain level of fitness today to a desired level of fitness sometime out in the future in preparation for a particular event. That's actually what training is called. That's what training, not called, but that's what training is. And what it implies is that obviously, if the program is working well, you will be able to do a lot more work, training work, 4 months or 3 months or 6 months from now than you are currently. So you need to start with a level of work, and this could mean volume and intensity of the work that's appropriate for your current level of fitness. And then over time, that training, what we call the training load, will increase and progress and become more difficult. And so what would today be impossible for you to do because you lack the fitness, in a few months become routine. You'll be able to do it, no problem. And so athletes train the general public exercises, if that makes any sense. Now, the thing that's a little bit confusing is, if you exercise enough, you can become very fit by exercising a lot. You will probably never reach your true potential because if there's a randomness to exercising, and it's not typically progressive. It doesn't take you from, it's not matched to your current level of fitness and progressing you to a higher level of fitness in preparation for an event. Now, this training, the way an athlete would train, is what I've tried to lay out in both the books, Training for the New Alpinism and Training for the Uphill Athlete, as well as all my writings on the website. We've tried to introduce principles of training from more traditional sports into these mountain sports, because these training philosophies, training theories have been well known for decades in traditional sports like running or swimming or cycling. All those sports have been very heavily studied. But it was just a matter of taking that knowledge base that exists in those sports and bringing it into these pretty unconventional sports that we do.
One of the things that I learned from the book is the difference between high intensity and low intensity. Now, why I am bringing this up is, most people who have very less idea about how to reach a particular fitness goal, they have this perception that the higher the intensity, the harder it looks, the better it is. Now, especially for climbing mountains, after reading the book, I learned that this is the worst thing you can do if you want to be an endurance athlete. So, what is the difference between high intensity workouts and lower intensity workouts, especially for someone who wants to climb mountains?
Yeah, another great question, and a very common misconception in many amateur people who are interested in exercise or training. We're gonna have to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, so bear with me. Okay, in order to move our body, to move at all, it takes energy to move. That energy is produced through metabolic processes, inside the muscle. Now, every cell in your body requires metabolism to stay alive, but we're going to only think about and talk about the muscles because that's what moves us when we're out for a run or hiking up a big mountain. So the way we produce that energy is very critical to our ability to perform, especially in endurance sports that last a long time. But by that, I mean, many minutes to many hours. So these two metabolic processes that we have, primary metabolic processes that we have for producing energy for movement, one requires the use of oxygen, and it's called the aerobic metabolic pathway. And it can fuel long duration, relatively low intensity activity for hours and hours and hours, many hours at a time. And it's the primary metabolic pathway that you would use. Actually, believe it or not, and this is probably going to be shocking to most people, but it is the principal energy production pathway in your muscles for any activity that lasts more than about 2 minutes. So you can imagine when you start talking about something that lasts 2 hours or 20 hours, like climbing Everest, that this is the dominant energy pathway. Now, we have another energy pathway that does not require the use of oxygen, and it can produce a lot of energy very quickly, but it has a drawback in that it has kind of a negative feedback loop built into it, with the accumulation of metabolites that are kind of, I don't want to use the term waste products, but they're byproducts of that anaerobic without oxygen metabolic pathway that create this negative feedback that in time, and the time meaning just a few minutes, will begin to shut down that pathway. So if it's producing a lot of energy, it can do that for just a few minutes, but then the accumulation of these what are called metabolites, or these byproducts, will actually start to decrease the production of the energy that was coming from that anaerobic pathway. So you've got these two principal metabolic pathways. They are trained in completely different ways. In order to stimulate them to increase their production, you have to train for the aerobic pathway, which once again is the dominant energy production mechanism for long duration exercise. You have to train that in a relatively low intensity. And then the other one, that anaerobic pathway, it is trained primarily when you train at high intensity exercise. Now, the problem is that when you train one of these pathways, you decrease the capacity of the other one. It's a very tricky balance to. You can't increase the capacity of each of these pathways at the same time. When you raise one, you decrease the other. So for coaches of let's say middle distance running is a perfect example of a sport where you need both of the capacities to be elevated quite high. And it's a very tricky balance for a coach and an athlete to manage, because, as I said, when you raise one, you lower the other. So you kind of have to periodize the training and balance it. It's a challenge. Whereas when you get to very long distance events, it becomes simpler, because, as I said, that dominant pathway, the aerobic pathway, it's trained by low intensity, and the higher the volume of low intensity training, the more stimulus it gets. So when a person goes into the gym and let's say they embark on some sort of high intensity circuit training, they're actually decreasing the capacity of the principal metabolic energy production process that will help them in the mountain. The problem with this for us as humans is it feels good to train hard. You feel like I'm really doing something here. I'm knocking it out of the park. I can tell I'm stronger today than I was yesterday. And you are. And in fact, the adaptations that come from high intensity interval style training, like let's say a circuit in the gym, like CrossFit or one of these other, high intensity circuits, the adaptations that happen with that happen quite quickly. And
Okay.
so there's a really nice positive feedback. So you go to the gym and you can feel yourself from almost from day to day, but certainly from week to week, you can think, wow, I can now do stuff I couldn't do a few weeks ago. Again, the problem with that is that you're also decreasing the capacity of the aerobic metabolism, and you will reach a plateau. After usually 6 to 8 weeks, you'll kind of reach a plateau where you no longer improve with just this exclusively doing this high intensity training.
Okay.
So that's it in a nutshell. I know it's a rather complicated thing, and I hope I didn't confuse too many people with that explanation.
Oh no, I think I think this is the most important topic anyone needs to understand who wants to climb mountains, because this is one of the big mistakes I did in my early days. I used to watch high intensity workouts on YouTube and follow them and thinking, oh, I did my workout today. But when I went to the mountains, something was not working out. I'm like, I'm working out so much, but when I go to the mountains, I'm getting tired maybe in 45 minutes or 1 hour. So I think this is one of the most important things that we spoke about for somebody who is preparing to climb mountains. Should they not do any high intensity or anaerobic training at all, or does it have some place in the overall fitness to get ready for a mountain?
Absolutely, it does. Yes, that's the way an athlete would train. Even an ultra distance runner who might be running in a 200-kilometer race, which is not uncommon. There's thousands of people that do this. They will still need some high intensity, even though 99.999% of the energy that's being produced for them in that race is coming from this aerobic energy pathway. It's more important even in terms of climbing to high altitude, and I'll explain why. And this is probably something that leads people erroneously to think that they should be training high intensity, and that is, and if you've been to high altitude, and you certainly have many times, and probably some of the folks in your audience have, you know that you're breathing very hard, even though you're moving quite slowly.
Yes.
And the reason for that is, as most people would know, is there's less oxygen in each breath that you take. So the muscles can't do as much work as they can at sea level or low elevations. Your brain is saying, hey, we need that oxygen. So you're breathing as if you were doing something at high intensity at low elevations.
Right.
So imagine, doing one of these circuit style type workouts in a gym where you're jumping from exercise to exercise and working very hard, breathing really hard. You're thinking, well, this is what it feels like when I'm at altitude. I'm breathing like crazy here. So that must be correct. Well, the problem is that when you go to altitude, yes, you're breathing really hard, but the muscles aren't doing much work. And because there isn't enough oxygen to support high intensity work at altitude. So that gives people the sense that I need to go hard enough to elevate my breathing and my heart rate like I would at sea, or when I do that at sea level. That sort of simulates the demands at high altitude. Well, it simulates the demands for what they call the ventilatory muscles, the breathing muscles, but it doesn't. In fact, it's the absolutely wrong thing to do in terms of the muscles in, let's say, your legs that are propelling you up the mountain.
Right.
That's one of the reasons I think people have this misconception, is thinking, oh, I need to be doing all this high intensity. But as you found out, you will probably feel really strong for the first 30 to 45 minutes, but all of us, then you just completely lose it, and you become very tired very quickly, because that energy pathway we talked about, first of all, it has a very limited, it can only use carbohydrates for energy, sugar.
Right.
And our body has very limited ability to store carbohydrates. About 1,500 kilocalories, even in a well-trained athlete. And you can burn through that in an hour. Once the fuel tank, the storage of this carbohydrate fuel, once it's gone, then you have nothing to run on. Now, the advantage of this aerobic metabolic pathway I was talking about is it can use carbohydrates, but it can also use fat. Even a lean marathon runner will have 100,000 kilocalories. So as stored, and it's stored intramuscularly. It's stored inside the muscles, close to where it's needed for fuel.
Okay.
I'm not talking about the kind of fat you can grab a hold of around your waist. That's not the same thing. It's very hard to, as you know, anybody who's ever tried to lose that kind of fat knows, it's hard to get rid of that fat, because you almost have to be in a starvation mode. You have to be chronically depleted of energy. You kind of have to be in a negative energy balance in order to reduce what we call subcutaneous, this fat that's right under the skin. Now, back to the fat that you need, because this aerobic pathway can use energy from both these sources. It can use carbohydrates and it can use fat. It can fuel energy for many hours at a time.
Okay.
And again, these activities that we're primarily talking about, climbing mountains, they typically last a lot longer than 45 minutes and to an hour. They might last several days.
Mm-hmm.
That's another advantage to training that aerobic pathway. And the thing that I think there's a big misconception, and it's been put out there in the public's eye. I don't know whether the people don't know any better or if they're just trying to deceive folks. They're trying to sell these high intensity type of, these high intensity workouts that you see online all the time. It's quite a fad, and it's very popular, but no endurance athlete trains that way. None. No professional endurance athlete would ever train like that. I think that these people that are pushing that kind of stuff, they're counting on the fact that the public is ignorant of this fact. So they push this on folks, telling them, oh, you can get the same benefits in, a 15-minute HIIT session in the gym, high intensity interval session in the gym, instead of going for a 1-hour run. There is a benefit to doing that 15-minute high intensity interval session.
Better than nothing.
But it's completely different than the training adaptation that comes from that 1-hour easy run.
Right.
And that's the part that I think people don't understand. You can't substitute one for the other. Like training that long distance or long duration, low intensity, that doesn't help the high intensity either. So they don't help one another. They don't cross each other. There's no, let's say, cross-training effect or minimal cross-training effect. But going back to your question with this, yes, there is a time and a place for high-intensity training for every endurance athlete, even someone who's running, a 200-kilometer race or climbing a big mountain.
Right.
Just has to be fit into the schedule at the right time and in the right way.
Of course, yes. And the training plan that I've been following of yours, 24-week big mountain plan, in that the high intensity ones, they come in the later half of the routine. So I think a strong base has to be built before that for somebody who wants to climb mountains from being nothing to, for example, let's say a 6,000-meter mountain. How many weeks or months of proper, focused, guided training should they go through in order to get ready for 6,000er, for an example?
That's a difficult question to answer, and because it's very individual. But I can tell, when you say nothing, I would hope it's not truly nothing. That's person starting with. They have had some sort of physical activity. Then, so it depends on their training history. It also depends on their age. The older you get, the slower these adaptations to training take place. Anybody who has ever been around children who are involved in sports will notice that the children get better like day to day. They improve really fast. So whatever you have them do, whether it's playing, football or, video games or running or swimming, whatever it is, children rapidly adapt to any kind of external stimulus.
Right.
The older we get, the harder it is to change, the way we are. So somebody who is healthy and 30 and actively, walks a lot or something like that, then within a year, you could have somebody like that ready to be successful. You can have people who are unfit who manage to climb some of these big mountains just because they're willing to suffer a great deal. Now, the problem with that is it's not very fun, and it also has a lot of danger. It's quite risky at high altitude. I mean, I'm sure you have encountered people who they have the mental ability to push themselves extremely hard. But when you do that in the mountains, you're not only risking your own life, but you're risking the lives of everybody around you on the team who may have to rescue you. So I'm talking about being adequately prepared to do something like this safely and enjoyably.
Absolutely. And Scott, I wanted to ask you this one question. You saw the recent spring 2023 season, the disastrous season, I would say. People don't understand that what happened in 2023, the rescues, the deaths, the injuries, the evacuations were, in my eyes, so many of them were very avoidable with the right kind
Yes.
of, at least the understanding that when are you ready and when are you not. And in especially in India, unfortunately, it's very painful for me to say this, but the young people right now have very less patience. They see somebody on their Instagram who has climbed Everest, and then they go online and see, oh, there are hundreds of people climbing every year. So okay, I can be just another one. I can do it. But when they go up there, you see what happens. What went through your mind, or what is your perception, or rather your message to the people from the 2023 spring season?
Well, first of all, I wanted to tell you that that phenomenon is not unique to India. Um, it's the phenomenon of, I mean, I think, yes, people are looking for instant gratification.
Right.
I'm old. I'm almost 70 years old. I've been climbing since I was a
No.
teenager.
70?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Oh my, you don't look 70. You look 45-ish, if I have
Well,
to.
I wish I felt 45-ish. But anyway, so I've seen a huge change in the culture of climbing in my
Hmm.
lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was climbing big mountains like this, between what 50 and 30 years ago or so, to go to the Himalaya first of all, and especially from the U.S. because it's a long way. It's around the corner for people living in India, and
Right.
literally you're at the doorstep. It was a goal that a young climber might harbor a goal to do something like that, but know that it was going to take years to build the
Mm.
experience to be able to do that, especially climbing something like Mount Everest or K2 or one of the bigger mountains. This would be the pinnacle achievement of a mountaineering career.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And nowadays we have people with literally in some cases, and I'm sure you've seen it, with absolutely no experience at all.
Yes.
Maybe they've never even had crampons on their feet,
That's
and they're
true.
going to these big mountains. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what's enabled that is the guiding world. There's some pluses to that. It has allowed people who aren't professional climbers to experience some of this, and I think there's some real value to that. But it has also lowered the bar to the point where, as you said, people oh, look at that fellow. He climbed on Instagram and he climbed Everest. I should be able to do that. We hear this all the time for people who come to us for coaching for these big mountains. I've been very successful in my career as some sort of business professional, doctor, lawyer, whatever it is. And so I should be able to just take that sort of success and transfer it over here to mountain climbing, even though I've never climbed anything in my life. There's that, it's kind of a sense of hubris that allows them to think that being successful in one area will make them successful in another. And they probably can
Mm-hmm.
be guided to being successful,
Yeah.
but it's not going to happen overnight. That a lot of the disaster stories, as you just said, some of those things are so easy to have prevented them. People dying or freezing and losing all their fingers and toes and that sort of thing. Those things don't need to happen. I mean,
No.
it used to be stuff like that used to happen in climbing years ago. It's always happened. It's a dangerous business. Now with the barrier to entry so low, I mean, all it takes is money to climb these mountains now. It doesn't take, you don't have to pay your dues in terms of many years of
Mm.
gradually building up the experience and the fitness that would be needed. Now you can pay, $80,000 and a guide will take you to the summit of Everest.
They will drag you.
There will literally, I have seen it and you have too.
Yes.
One Sherpa pulling on the rope and another Sherpa behind pushing. And they're carrying all the gear and the extra oxygen. I mean, it's kind of a sad state of affairs, in my opinion. If the whole goal is to climb this big mountain because it's a big mountain, then where's the reward in having someone pull you and another person pushing you to the top? You're not doing it under your own power. And so I struggle to understand how people gauge or see that as a success where they didn't do this on their own. And it took a lot of effort on someone else's part. I mean, I have literally seen 3 Sherpas literally dragging, almost dragging someone to the summit. And maybe it's just my old age and ethics of the a bygone era that say to me, wow, how I wouldn't be able to go home and go, I climbed K2 or Everest or whatever it is. I would go home and go, I was dragged to the summit of K2. And it's to me, it's like only a small step from there to helicoptering to the summit.
So, this is what happened this year on Annapurna or on Everest. So many people summited, but they were rescued down. And now they are saying, oh, we summited. It just blows my mind because I have myself walked away just a couple of 100 meters away from so many 8,000ers. I have failed on more expeditions than success because I knew things were not okay, turn around. And I'm proud to say all my fingers and toes and nose and ears, everything is intact. That is success for me. If I even think that I'm getting rescued because of my wrong decisions, it's a disgrace for me in my eyes. Okay, if you are hit by an avalanche or something, those things are something which you cannot avoid. But if you had the chance to walk away when the time was right and still you get rescued, that is a disgrace in my eyes. And so many people this year submitted, but came down in a heli and are saying they submitted.
We participate in that sport. It's a sport without really many rules at all. There are still climbers who are climbing with a very strict code of ethics. It's a small group of professional climbers who hold these, have these ethical standards. And they will say if they did it ethically or in their mind, using the ethics they subscribe to, or if they, and usually in their cases, if they, like if they can't do it subscribing or using their own ethical standards, then they don't do it. No one cares whether you summited Everest. Nobody.
Exactly.
Except maybe your parents or your friends or the people you're trying to impress at the next cocktail party or the next talk you give at some business convention or something like that. 100%. But in reality, it just doesn't matter. I mean, it mattered when Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay stood on the summit because, okay, this is a breakthrough in human achievement. Now we have been able to make it so that any healthy person who puts their mind to it can probably achieve this.
Of course.
And it's amazing how that's happened. It hasn't happened because these people that are summiting Everest, they're not stronger than Tenzing or Edmund Hillary. They're not better climbers. They just have much more technology. And as you pointed, now they have a safety net that the helicopters can go as high as Camp 2 now even.
Camp 3.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. On Everest.
On Annapurna, for example, people were long line rescued from 7,500, 7,600 meters. Long line, of course, not landing there, but it flies that high now.
That's scary. I mean, I didn't realize helicopters could fly that high. But when you have that sort of safety net, then of course you're going to be willing to take these chances. That, I mean, think of the danger to that helicopter pilot to make that rescue.
Exactly.
I mean, I think a lot of people don't consider this. When you've seen disasters in the mountains, like certainly I have over my career, and you certainly have, I would hope most people would come away from that a little more humble.
Wiser.
And realize, okay, this is really dangerous. And maybe what if it's a cloudy day and the helicopter can't fly? Then you're screwed. You are going to die. And I think many people, they see a beautiful sunny summit day picture on some of these big mountains, and they think, oh, I can do that. And they don't realize that when things go wrong at that altitude in those big mountains, they can go wrong very fast. No one's going to be able to, well, maybe it'll happen now that you're saying people can fly to 7,500 meters, but no one can rescue you from 8,000 meters or above. I mean, you're on your own. And it's so dangerous above there that I think a lot of people don't realize, yes, you can die doing this. I mean, the fatality rate among mountaineers, it's one of the most dangerous sports there is.
Absolutely.
Which maybe that's what appeals to people about it. I'm not sure.
So on Instagram, when I posted the story today, the most repeated question I got was about no O2 ascents, about the preparation for that. And one guy, I will name him Surjo, he sent a very nice question with a very nice quote. Either you are born for climbing 8,000ers without O2, or you're not? And what I mean to ask is, like, some individuals, do they have it in them, inborn, to climb without O2, that capacity? Somebody like me, for example, who is a climber, who has been at it for some years, can I also train and reach to climb that level of without O2? How does it work, the physiology of it?
That's a great question, and there is a huge genetic component. And
Mm.
I'll tell, if I can, I'll tell a little story about this. So some years ago, probably now, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I was a featured speaker at an international conference for high altitude warfare. And it was held among the NATO nations, special operations groups came together to talk about how to prepare soldiers to be able to operate at high altitudes. Very interestingly, one of the other presenters is one of maybe the world's leading authority on acclimatization and the physiology of acclimatization. I won't go into detail, but he had done some studies and tests on athletes, on running athletes at high altitude. What he found was that I believe it was over 1/4 of the human genome is affected when you go to altitude. About half the genes were upregulated and other half were downregulated.
Oh, really?
But we knew, or he knew, and by extension, you could say that we, as the humans know only what a few of those genes do. There's thousands of genes that are affected when you go to altitude, and we don't know what they do. Right there, it tells you that just like in any other, some people are going to have a gift for math. Other people are going to have a gift for playing the piano. Other people are going to have a gift for running fast. And some people are going to have a gift for high altitude. They're going to be genetically endowed, from birth, because they've got an excess of some of these particular genes that may allow them to acclimatize faster and more completely than other people. Opposite end, there are probably, I've met a few people like this who are literally what they call non-responders. They just can't acclimate to higher altitude. They struggle. Yeah. Well, again, it's just something to do with the genetics. They just don't have a preponderance of those genes that are set up to. They'll get the same triggering effect when they go to altitude. Their body will try to adapt to it, but they'll adapt poorly or very slowly. Now, so you don't know this until you go to altitude. At this point, I don't think, maybe they exist, but I don't know of a test that you can take that says, oh, you're going to do well at altitude, or no, you should stay at sea level the rest of your life. I don't know that such a thing exists. It's probably coming if it doesn't exist already. So your friend, or the fellow who wrote in, is right. There are people who adapt very well to altitude, very quickly and very completely. You can only know by doing it. So there's another factor that we need to talk about, and that is the science of epigenetics. We're born with a certain gene package. The color of your eyes, your height, your weight, all those sorts of things are kind of, in some ways, they're predetermined. And some of them, we obviously can't change the color of our eyes. So that's not going to happen. But other genes are very heavily influenced by our surroundings and the way we behave. You can change some genetic components, and that's what epigenetics means. So by the environment you live in, or by the training you undertake, you can actually, over a long period of time, affect your genetics. So it does seem, in my experience, and I think there's some very good evidence for this. In fact, I had Kilian Jornet on my podcast a while back, and he and I were discussing acclimatization rates. He happens to be one of those people that acclimatizes very well, or he wouldn't have been able to pull off all the things he's done at altitude. But he then, at the end of our conversation, he sent me a link to a very interesting article about the epigenetics of acclimatization. And I wrote an article that's on our website about it. So I would encourage people who are interested in that to read it. It does seem that the more times you go to altitude, the easier it is to acclimatize. I would say anecdotally, people have known this for years, that the more trips you make to the Himalaya, probably the easier you're going to deal with the changes going up to high altitude. And I think that epigenetics helps explain how that happens. You just keep exposing yourself over and over and over again.
And body remembers what to
the
do.
body begins to remember. And interestingly, and this is what I talk about in that article, there was a study done on these indigenous people in Peru living at high altitude, and how these epigenetic traits that are developed in a generation transfer down to their children. So the children are then born with this. So you can now see why, oh, this is why Sherpas do so well at altitude.
Mm-hmm.
They have been generation after generation after generation. They're passing down these genetic traits that allow, and the ones who don't do well at altitude, they live somewhere else. So the ones that are living there are the product of epigenetic, generational thing.
Interesting.
So I think that that's a long way of saying that I think the fellow who asked that question is correct. Yeah, there are some people who probably born that way, although I do think we can affect it to some extent.
For somebody who is preparing to climb 8,000 with oxygen versus without oxygen, what fundamental difference in the training should there be?
So depending on the flow rates you're using, the flow rate of oxygen on that summit day, you can lower the summit of Everest to 6,000 meters, 6,500 meters. If you crank it up to 6 liters per minute of flow, then all of a sudden, yes, you may be physically standing on the summit of Everest, but you are not experiencing what the summit of Everest feels like, because you're from a oxygen standpoint, you're actually at 6,500 meters or so.
Right.
And so the person who is climbing with oxygen, it has a great deal to do with the rate of oxygen that they're consuming. Now, the standard for most people is 2 liters per minute.
Right.
And 1 if you're really trying to conserve, but there are definitely guide services and operators that will allow you. It costs a lot more money, because not only is the oxygen expensive, but you got to have somebody carrying those oxygen bottles up the mountain for you. So if you want to breathe 4 liters or 6 liters per minute, it's going to cost you a lot more money to climb Mount Everest. Climbing without supplemental oxygen, it's an entirely different training regime that a person would need to go into. It's at an entirely different level. It's the reason that only, how many thousands, I don't know, I never keep track. How many thousands of people?
Around 5,000 people have climbed Everest total.
Everest. And I think there's about 200 have climbed it without supplemental oxygen. Very small fraction.
Very.
And it entails a lot more risk. And you need to be considerably more fit to do it. So I would say, we have trained several people to climb big mountains. Actually, I just did a podcast with Adrian Ballinger a few days ago, and I worked together with Adrian for an entire year, coaching him to prepare him. He climbed Everest and K2, both without supplemental oxygen.
Yes.
But here was a guy who had already climbed, he'd been on the summit of about 16 8,000 meter peaks by that time. And then he was a professional guide, and he was also very fit. He's an ultra runner. And he still had to train very hard for over a year to pull that off. So it's a very big commitment. Yeah.
Right. I was with him on Everest in 2019. I mean, not with him in his team, but on the same mountain on the Chinese side. And I submitted.
He's a professional. He's been doing it a long time.
Yes. And he had spoken about you back then. I remember very well. Like, this is a little strange kind of a question it might sound, but I see a lot of Sherpas, a lot of professional mountaineers who are chain smokers and heavy drinkers, but they are still able to climb, and some of them without O2. Like, for example, if we speak about Nims Dai, he's still able to climb successfully. So does smoking and drinking affect? If yes, why not to these people?
Well, it does affect. Just imagine how incredibly good he would be without that. So I think you can't use kind of extreme examples to understand the norm or the median. If that didn't impact performance, all these professional runners and cyclists, they'd be smoking and drinking up a storm.
Right.
But they don't. And the reason they don't is for one reason is that because the level of competition in those sports at the professional level is so high, you need every advantage you can possibly get, and you don't want to do things that would diminish your performance. What he's done is incredible, and I have a tremendous respect for it. But the field of high altitude mountaineering and how fast people climb and recover and all that, this is in its infancy. Let's say long distance running in 1860. That's where we are with climbing, right? With mountaineering right now. I mean, back then, people, well, let's say more likely when the marathon first was introduced into the Olympics, people would walk. They walked the marathon. They couldn't run the whole distance. Okay. Now, the best people in the world are running a marathon in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, but I believe the sport of mountaineering is in those very early days where like the marathon was, where people were walking. Yes, there are people like him, and he could be an incredible genetic freak. We don't know. But I don't think you can use that as an example and say, oh yeah, well then it doesn't matter. Because if it didn't matter, we know that it matters. We know it matters from a health standpoint. And we also know from other sports, endurance sports, that it matters from a performance standpoint. But I wish I could, it'd be great to be able to figure out what he does and then sell a pill that allows you to do what he does.
I think, I have met him a couple of times on various mountains, on Everest, on Annapurna, on Manasulu. And whenever I meet him, beyond physiology, I see a fire in his eyes, and I think it has a lot to do about some, things which function beyond just body, the mind, the emotions, the energies, the drive. And I think it has to do more with that.
The psychology. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is another question which a lot of people ask me, how to get mentally strong to climb mountains. I'm putting it out there so simply, the questions, I know, but they are more complex to answer, of course. But how to build the mental endurance, in other words?
I think that's not a very hard question to answer, frankly.
Okay.
All endurance sports involve suffering and it's, in fact, the person who can suffer the most is often going to prevail with the best performance. And I think high altitude mountaineering is one of those sports where suffering is right at the top of the attributes you need to have in order to climb well.
Yes.
And the way you get there, and this is the part that I find I don't think it's very complicated. You just have to do it over and over and over again. Because if you took somebody who had never been in that, how terrible you feel so bad at 7,000 meters on the day you're going to go to the summit. Like if you felt like that at home, you wouldn't even go to work. Now you're going to go try to climb an 8,000 meter peak that day, but you feel literally like sick, terrible. You didn't sleep the night before. And so it's obviously going to involve a lot of suffering. But if you took somebody who had never done that before and you put them in that position, their brain is going to be exploding with like, whoa, what is going on here? It's dangerous. It's frightening. It's uncomfortable. All these alarms are going to be going off in that person's brain. Like, get me out of here. Let's say you'd climbed a bunch of 6,000 meter peaks first, and then you climbed a few 7,000 meter peaks at first. Then you climb some of the lower, easier 8,000 meter peaks. Your brain is going to get used to it. You're either going to decide this level of suffering is not for me and I don't want to do it anymore, or you're going to go, okay, I know what this headache feels like. I realize it's going to take me an hour to put my frozen boots on in the morning, and I'm just going to deal with it. And everything takes longer, it's slower, and you become accustomed to it. And so I think it's less about, having some secret mental training trick than it is exposure. You undoubtedly, maybe you've heard, know this, that, like these ice baths that people often take now are really popular. Well, have you ever jumped in a bath full of ice? If you did that the first time, you would be in there for 2 seconds and be right out.
Right.
Because your brain and your body just say, no way, I'm not doing this. Then you learn that people can accustom themselves to this and they can sit in there for an hour. And so I think it's the same sort of thing. You need to expose yourself gradually to it. It's a little bit like the physical training. You, Parth, are not going to go out, run 30-minute, 10-kilometer race the first time you try. Not going to happen.
No.
But train for a few years, yeah, it might be possible, but because your
Absolutely.
body's going to have to adapt and learn and all that. So I honestly think it's less. I mean, it is mental for sure, but it's not like you need to train a mental trick thing. Like I've often heard people ask about that, and I said, no, just go out there and do it a lot, and you'll eventually get to where, okay, I can handle this. I can deal with this, the discomfort or the suffering.
In your eyes, in your experience, does meditative practices, help the person to become more centered or more resilient towards the sufferings that may come?
I don't know so much on the sufferings, but I think that meditation can play a very powerful role in recovery between stressful training sessions, let's say.
Interesting.
Because our central nervous system, which governs all the activity in our body, we have a parasympathetic side and a sympathetic side. The parasympathetic side is the side that helps us rest and relax. And the sympathetic side is the one that when the saber-toothed tiger jumps out behind the tree, that you can sprint away from it. Well, I think that most of us, I certainly know my own experience, and I think in the West, where life is really hectic, and maybe in India, it's the same way. So we're always in that, what they call the fight or flight state. Our sympathetic nervous system is really active. Because there's all this external stimuli coming into us. We're physically really active. We're concerned about work or friends or family or training, so we're almost always in this sort of hyper sympathetic nervous system state. It's always jacked up, let's call it. And it's very hard then to turn that down and elevate the parasympathetic side of our nervous system, which allows us to relax. And it's when the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant that we rest and we recover from stress. Anything you can do that elevates, that increases the activity of the parasympathetic nervous system is going to improve your recovery, and it's probably going to make you a happier, better person, but it's also going to make you recover from stress, whether it's mental stress or physical stress of training.
So we spoke about the endurance part of getting ready for a mountain, the aerobic part of it. It would be unfair to not speak about the strength part of it, because I think this is another big misconception that people have. For example, I lead a lot of trek. It can be expeditions or weekend treks around where I live. And I see some really jacked up, full buffed up and muscular men who come for the trek. And before the trek, they are walking in their swag, thinking that they'll crush this mountain, and 100 meters into the climb, and they are the most fucked up amongst even people who have never ran 5 kilometers. So strength, most people's perception of strength is lifting weights and gym workouts. How should the strength part be if you want to climb a mountain, for example? How is that different?
Well, first of all, mountain climbing doesn't require that much strength, honestly. I mean, if you're the person who may need to develop more strength is typically a small woman, because they're going to be carrying a pack, and that pack is going to be a larger percentage of their body weight than, let's say, your body weight. I mean, if you're carrying a 15-kilo pack, but you weigh, 50 or 60 kilos, that's very different than if you weighed, 80 kilos. We typically see that if we need to make a special focus on building some strength, it's usually with a woman that weighs, 45 or 50 kilos, and they're going to be going to, let's say, Denali, which is a mountain where you've got to carry a heavy pack for weeks and weeks at a time. So then strength can play a role. It's not, you don't need to be very strong, because first of all, the speed of movement is so slow at high altitude that, you just take a smaller step, and it's not that big of a deal that you're moving a tiny bit slower than someone else who might be a little bit stronger. But the big problem with these, like you said, these jacked up guys, huge muscles, is that all of those muscles require oxygen. So massive biceps or trapezius muscles, that look great in movies or on, in a magazine or something. those have to have oxygen delivered to them or they will die.
Right.
Every cell in our body requires oxygen all the time. Well, if you've got huge biceps and you're a big, huge guy, maybe you weigh 100 kilos and, really strong in the gym, all that oxygen is going to those muscles is oxygen that's not available for your legs to go up the hill. So that's the main reason that especially men, big, strong men typically don't do very well at altitude. Is it, first of all, they're carrying a bunch of, let's call it dead weight. It's
Right.
it might be useful for picking up girls in the bar, but it's not very useful on the mountain to have those big muscles. So it's kind of useless muscle mass. Then it has to be oxygenated, has to have oxygen used. Those are the two reasons why really strong looking and big
Right.
muscle people typically don't do well. If you look at the people who do extremely well in the mountains, they tend to be very small, slight people.
So how is the strength preparation different for climbing mountains? I mean, what is the approach like?
Again, if you're starting with someone who's very weak, let's say a young person who's never done, has children, for instance, or maybe a woman who's very small. I mean, and many women have a struggle to gain strength and to put on muscle. That's just unfortunately part of being a woman. It's hard for you to do that. Some women put on muscle easily, but most don't. But for them, it's going to be a different type of an approach because we just want to see if we can add a little bit of muscle mass to them. But for 95% of the people we deal with, they're probably strong enough. What we'll do then is we do strength training. It's usually a couple of times a week that we prescribe it, but it's usually done in what we would call a very sport-specific way. We do it in ways that this is strength that you're going to need on the mountain. So in particular, it would be, let's say, stepping up onto maybe a 40 centimeter, 50 centimeter box with a heavy weight on your back. Maybe you'd put 30 kilos in a backpack, or a barbell in a gym works fine. In a squat rack, because then you can control it a little easier, and you step up on a box. That type of strength that transfers very well over to climbing a mountain, whereas something like, let's say, a more traditional weightlifting exercise like a deadlift or a squat, where you've got both feet planted on the ground, that doesn't transfer over nearly as well because we move up the mountain one leg at a time.
Right.
So we need to have, if you're going to develop more strength, let's develop it in a way that's very specific to moving one foot at a time. So that we try to make our strength training focused on more specific strength movements. So we wouldn't be doing bicep curls or bench press, things like that, because those are not useful at all for climbing a mountain.
This one question my fiance, she specifically asked me to ask you. She has all her life, like most her life, been a weightlifter, a power lifter. She has also had this interest of climbing mountains. And last year, we were planning to climb a 6,000er in India, and I asked her to purchase the 24-week plan that I've been following also. It was first time for her working on her aerobic capacity, and she found it very hard. What do I mean by that specifically is that if she started running, for example, her heart rate would spike up very fast. She was able to run at, for example, 165 or 170 beats per minute effortlessly for an hour. And it was very strange for me to see that how are you able to run for such a long time at such high heart rate for powerlifters or for weightlifters if they want to become endurance athletes? Is it harder for them? That's the basic question which I wanted to ask.
Not necessarily, but they don't have either the cardiac development. I mean, the reason her heart rate was high relative. I mean, first of all, everyone's heart rate is individual. Your 165 is different than her 165.
Right.
Maybe her maximum is 220 and your maximum is 190. So, there's something to be, you have to think about that. You cannot compare heart rates from one person to another.
Okay.
So first of all, get that cleared up. Then the next thing is the training effect of lifting heavy weights. What that has, the effect that has on your heart is almost the entirely opposite effect that endurance training has. When you strain, to lift a heavy weight, it creates a huge spike in your blood pressure during that time, and it creates back pressure into the heart. And that affects the way the heart adapts to that type of training. Now, first of all, you don't need a lot of cardiac capacity to lift a heavy weight. It's not something, because it's, lifting a heavy weight for powerlifting, it's one repetition. So it has, as long as there's enough oxygen and blood in your body so you don't pass out and fall over, you can lift that weight. I mean, she can hold her breath and lift that weight. She doesn't even need to be breathing when she's lifting that weight. So, whereas when you're training for endurance, because the delivery of oxygen, which is carried by the blood, is so critical, that the adaptation that the heart makes is to become bigger and stronger. And so it can pump more blood with each heartbeat. So this is why endurance athletes will have often a very low resting pulse. I don't know if you've noticed if yours has gone down over time. The reason it's lower is that your heart can now pump more blood with each beat. The endurance athlete is going to be able to deliver more blood, more oxygen at a lower heart rate because their heart is bigger. So in her case, what has happened from years and years of weightlifting is the heart hasn't had that stimulus to develop a bigger, bumped into the microphone, to develop a bigger, what they call cardiac output, or stroke. They call it actually stroke volume. Excuse me, that was the wrong term. So her stroke volume is not as big as it would be if she were to engage in endurance training. Now, that adaptation, luckily for us, the heart is a muscle that adapts quite readily to training. A couple of years of endurance training, and her heart will start to look more like an endurance athlete's heart.
Okay. Got it. One of the things that I observed with her, and I think it could be an issue with a lot of people when she goes out for a run. According to the approach that we are using to keep our heart rate in zone 1, zone 2. So she was constantly looking at her heart rate, and that was really screwing up her entire approach in the workout. So is it something you encounter often with other people also?
It is. It can be distracting. There's a couple of ways around that. Ideally, in a perfect world, you wouldn't even need a heart rate monitor.
Right.
Your perception, your body's messages it's sending to you would be all you would need. And you would go, okay, I am in zone 1 or zone 2. I am in the aerobic metabolic pathways predominantly. And I don't even need to look at my heart rate. Most people don't have that sensitivity to be able to determine that. And that's where heart rate monitors can be quite useful. Now, one thing it would first preface this discussion with is she using a chest strap, or is she using the wrist monitor?
Just the wrist monitor as of now.
Okay. So in my experience, and I've only known a couple of people that have been able to get accurate heart rate data off of a wrist off the wrist monitor. And it has to do with the movement of the watch on your wrist. Even just a micro movement affects the output. And it typically reads too high. So it might be that when it says 165, her heart rate's actually 145. And would not surprise me. I've seen it happen hundreds and hundreds of times. And so if you want to get an accurate heart rate reading, I really think you need to have a chest strap. So anyway, now back to the discussion about that. Another way to have it be not so distracting is to set an alarm. A lot of watches will allow you to set an audible alarm that will go off when you exceed a certain heart rate. So you could set a heart rate at 165, or set an alarm at 165. And then when it goes off, you just know to slow down a little bit. And you don't have to be looking at your watch all the time. Now, after doing this for a while, you will be able to, there's sort of this biofeedback mechanism, and you'll learn, okay, this is what zone 1 and 2 feels like, and this is what harder feels like.
Exactly.
But most of us, it takes a while to do that. You have to have been doing it for quite a long time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So now it's been 6 months. I don't use a smartwatch because I exactly know what is the right zone for me to be in. And it's actually very simple. You can correct me if I'm wrong. as long as you are able to breathe using your nose, inhalation and exhalation, you are in the correct zone. The minute you
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing which I have observed, if you are able to speak full sentences or sing a song while you are climbing up, you are okay. You
Yeah,
are in the zone.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, some people might, it's kind of weird if you're running by yourself and talking to yourself, but if you have a running partner, yes,
Right.
if you can speak in, it's not going to be a 50 word sentence. It's going to be a 10-word sentence. But if you can speak with a complete sentences, and obviously you're going to be, you'll know if you're listening. If you were listening, you're having a conversation with your friend who was running and he was on his cell phone talking to you, you'd be able to tell he was running because he'll be breathing a little
Yes.
harder, and
Yes.
his he'll be catching his breath now and then. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, if you can carry on a conversation, even if it's a little bit strained, then you're probably in that correct training zone. Yeah.
Got
So
it. Got it.
either nose breathing is a little more stringent, it's a little more
Mm.
difficult.
Mm.
And of course, some people can't breathe through their nose very well at all. Just, that can be difficult for them. But conversation, yeah, we call it a conversational pace. If you can
Okay.
carry on a conversation, you are aerobic. You are in an aerobic zone.
But ideally, while climbing mountains, one should breathe from their nose, right?
It's hard to do because you're going to, at high altitude, you're going to be needing all the oxygen you can get into your lungs. And so chances are you're going to be breathing very hard at high altitude. If you were to try to limit it to only breathing through your nose, you'd have to be going much slower. So I think most people, it would be unusual to see somebody who's not breathing through their mouth and their nose at high altitude.
What about when you are training back home? Nose or
At,
mouth?
at, at low elevation, there's nothing. Some people think there's something special about breathing through their nose in terms
Okay.
of follow-on effects. I don't think it has any effect on your training, the
Oh.
efficacy of the training, breathing through your nose or breathing through your mouth. What matters is what is the metabolic state in your muscles that matters. And I don't think it matters how that oxygen gets there. Now, there
Okay.
might be some other benefits health-wise or something else to breathing through your nose. I
Hmm.
mean, as you maybe you practice yoga or something,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes.
notice, that breathing through your nose, that practice has, a long history.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that would exist if it didn't make a difference. So
Hmm.
I think there are probably benefits of breathing through your nose, but I think from a training standpoint, it doesn't matter whether you breathe through your nose or your mouth, except to check that, oh, I am in an aerobic
Right.
metabolic state when I breathe through my nose.
That's interesting. I have made this observation that especially when I'm training here, when I'm breathing through my nose, my heart rate and my breathing, they remain very much in control. As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to if I open my mouth, the heart rate just goes up and the breathing starts getting heavy. It is my personal observation.
Well, it's a valid. I think part of it is that you're able to take in more air, so
Okay,
more oxygen when you open your mouth, and it might be allowing you to run a little faster. So then your
exactly.
heart rate and your heart rate goes up because remember the heart is kind of a slave to the muscles. It's
Hmm.
reacting to the demands of the muscle. So if your muscles are producing more power, you're running faster, let's say,
Hmm.
they're sending a signal to the brain that says, hey, we need more oxygen out here in the leg muscles. So the brain tells the heart, hey, you need to increase the heart rate. So the heart is acting as in a reaction to your leg muscles.
I have two more questions for you. Diet. How important it is to eat in a certain way, and what is that certain way when you are preparing to climb a mountain
That's
when it
a good
comes to food?
question. I think that often there is too much made of nutrition. I think we are amazingly adaptable.
Hmm.
And I'll use an example that I've used many times before. The man that holds the 100-mile running record in the US is a carnivore. He eats
Okay.
only red meat.
Okay.
There's a very famous ultra runner, and I could say this about Kilian now, who is a vegan.
Okay.
And so both of these guys are incredibly successful at what they do, and they're at the opposite ends
Opposite
of the
ends, yes.
nutritional spectrum. So
Yes.
what that tells me is, as a species, we are remarkably adaptable.
Hmm.
Now, that being said, I think that obviously, eating a lot of junk food and sugar and things like that that's not a healthy diet. However, it might actually provide plenty of fuel for exercise. I mean, if you're exercising a lot, then you need calories.
Okay.
And your body doesn't really care what those calories come from, because it's going to break them down. I mean, you eat a big bowl of ice cream, it's going to break them down into your body's going to use the fat and it's going to use the sugar. From a calorie standpoint, there's not much difference between eating that and maybe some bread. Probably from a health standpoint, yeah, it's probably not that good to exist on ice cream. That wouldn't be a particularly healthy diet, but it could provide enough energy for exercise. There could be some follow-on effects that I don't think are good. But what I've seen over time is people with a full range of dietary preferences. Now, let's still talk about altitude, though. When you go to high altitude, your body is going to burn carbohydrates much easier than fat. So at high altitude, you probably, even if you were a carnivore, you would probably better be pretty wise to start to introduce to have a lot of carbohydrates at high altitude. Now, most people are not going to exist on a carnivore diet, and most people are probably not going to exist on a vegan diet. We're going to all be somewhere in the middle with a mixture of kind of dietary, what they call macronutrients.
Right.
And I think, if you're eating a well-balanced, good diet and you're getting plenty of carbohydrates, then you're going to be fine. I don't think diet limits people nearly as much as we're often led to believe with modern, there's a lot of stuff on the internet about, oh, you've got to eat this diet or you're not going to be healthy or you're not going to be strong. And I just think I've seen too many examples where that doesn't hold true.
So out of 100%, you have put a lot of emphasis on carbs. So how many percentage should carbs be if you want to, if you are in the preparation phase of climbing a mountain?
Depends a lot on how hard you're training and what the volume is, how much intensity. So if you're training with some intensity, like, in our programs, you would find those muscular endurance workouts.
Right.
So those are going to burn a lot of carbohydrates.
Oh, yes.
So if you're doing that kind of training, then yeah, you need to be fueling with carbohydrates quite a bit. If you're doing a lot of long duration, low intensity work where you're in that metabolic state, you're burning primarily fat, then carbohydrate intake is not as important during the exercise. After the exercise, it's important to replenish carbohydrates, I guess, because as I mentioned in the very beginning, we have a very small storage capacity for carbohydrate. So we need to top it up. We need to refuel with carbohydrates after our training. Whereas, fat, we have such a big store, it's not as critical. I would say for if you can kind of periodize your eating, that let's say you're going to have a hard workout in the morning, running intervals, or one of these muscular endurance sessions that we just talked about, then you're going to want to have a good high carbohydrate meal the night before, and maybe even a little small carbohydrate snack right before the workout in the morning, if you're doing it in the morning. Whereas if you were going to go for, let's say, a 3-hour hike in the mountains the next morning, then fueling up on carbohydrates is not quite so important the night before. And in fact, in some cases, some people will see a benefit to becoming more fat adapted, allowing their body to burn more fat. They might even do some of those low intensity aerobic workouts in a fasted state. And so like they get up in the morning and they just go out for an hour, very easy run without taking any carbohydrates before or during the run. So it depends. There's no one size fits all formula. Yeah.
Right. I personally find it better to do my workouts empty stomach for some reason. I feel more energetic, more lighter. And
I think a lot of people do, especially if it's a running workout. It's kind of hard to run with a full belly.
The last question which I had for you. So, endurance, strength, food, and recovery. In my eyes, these four are the basic pillars in some ways. There is a very famous quote I had read somewhere many years ago, and it stuck in my head that the training makes you weak, it is the recovery which makes you strong.
Yeah.
So, most people who are especially new, very excited, young energy, who have started off a training plan and they are like, oh, rest day. I'll do something. Come on. So,
Yeah.
how important is it to take a proper rest day? And what happens when you are resting and recovering in terms of gains in endurance and strength?
During the training session, doesn't matter if it's strength or endurance or speed or power or whatever, whenever that's when that sympathetic nervous system is cranked up because you need it. During the recovery period, and the most important recovery period of all is sleep, when we're sleeping. That's so that now the parasympathetic nervous system has taken over and you're in this restful state. That is when the adaptations to your body happen that were stimulated in the training session. When you go do a workout, they're going to cause stress to your system in one way or another. So if it's a long run, that's a certain type of stress. If it's going into the gym and lifting weights, that's another type of stress. And each one of those stresses that occurs it causes a signaling cascade in your body that is a reaction to that stress. And the end result of that signaling mechanism, and it's a fairly complex signaling, the end result is at the genetic level. It triggers certain genes to fire up and do their thing. So that the predominant one with this long duration, lower intensity run would be a signaling cascade that results in the particular gene that causes more mitochondria to develop in the muscle, because the mitochondria is where the aerobic metabolism takes place. That's the stress we're looking for. If we don't that's the response we're looking for to the stress. But if we don't give the body an adequate period of time to make that adaptation to that stress, if we apply another stress too soon, before the previous stress has been adapted to, you can actually end up in what they call a detraining state. You'll just be getting less and less fit from your training because there's not enough time to recover. And as I said, most of the recovery is done overnight while you're sleeping.
Okay.
Poor sleep is one of the worst ways to adapt to any kind of training stress if you get poor sleep. And one of the most common things that disrupts people's sleep is alcohol. So alcohol consumption, regardless of other health effects it might have on you, screws up your sleep patterns. And as a consequence, that means your body doesn't make these adaptations, because you need to be in a state of very deep sleep during the REM cycle, the rapid eye movement cycle of sleep. You need to be in that state because that's when the hormones, like growth hormones, like human growth hormone and testosterone, and for instance, they're at their highest level. And those things facilitate these adaptations, those higher hormone levels. So that's the first thing. And then the second is, like altitude acclimatization, there's a genetic component to this. Some people recover very quickly. And typically young people, you probably remember when you were young, you could stay out all night partying and the next day go out and go for a big run in the mountains and feel pretty good. Yeah. By the time you get to be 40 and 45 and 50, that's no longer the case. And the older you get, the slower the recovery process is. So it has to do with your own personal genetics and your age. So the way you need to decide this, how much recovery is enough recovery. Are you getting fitter at whatever you're training for? Maybe it's weightlifting. I mean, are you getting stronger in the weightlifting gym? Are you getting faster at running on a week to week basis? Then you're probably getting enough recovery. But if you don't see improvement on roughly a week or 2 week time frame, if you're not training, then of course it doesn't matter. That's why you're not seeing improvement. But if you're doing the training and you're not seeing improvement, every couple of weeks, you don't go, I'm running a little faster today than I did last time. Then the most likely culprit is you're not recovering well enough. You're not getting enough recovery. So I like to use that. Now there are apps like heart rate variability apps that you can use that will help monitor your recovery state. And this is a relatively new technology. It's becoming better and better. But that's, if you want to geek out on real tech type stuff, then and if you're really looking to optimize, then it's probably worth playing around with like a heart rate variability app to see if you're really recovered, because it's that thing. Remember, I've talked a few times now about this central nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So they exist in kind of a yin and yang balance with one another. And when one is high and one is low, heart rate variability is affected. And so you can actually see imbalance that exists between these two systems. And it'll tell you, oh, you better rest today. So you don't even have to make a subjective decision. You can have an objective feedback.
People often ask me this question, how to recover when you're on an expedition. For example, when you're going to Everest, you have to save your best version for the 5th day or the 4th or 5th day. That's when the real push comes. By the time you reach 7,900, 8,000 meters, you need to be strong. So day after day, the body wants to get weak because you are, constantly beating it up in high altitude, eating less, sleep is shit, but you have to be strong and get there and be at your peak. So how does one recover on high altitude?
That's one of the benefits of this being aerobically well adapted, aerobically fit, is that you recover from hard work much better when you are aerobically fit than when you don't have that aerobic fitness. So going into the expedition, with a big, what we call an aerobic capacity, the ability to do a lot of work aerobically, that is probably the very most important thing you can do that will help you recover, so that you're recovering from day to day. And then the other is to not extend yourself unnecessarily early in the expedition or in those 5 days when you're heading for the summit. The day you need to be strong, as you just said, is on that 5th day, not on, you don't care if you're the fastest one to Camp 2. That's, who nobody cares about that. So take it easy on yourself, so you're not stressing yourself any more than necessary until the final push at the summit. Then I think, as you said, eating is a really big one. A lot of people, it's very hard, as you know, to eat at high altitude. You just lose your appetite. A lot of times food just is not appetizing. And that's another place where experience can really help, because if you've been to altitude a lot, easier for you to eat when you're at high altitude if you've already done it a bunch. So, but maintaining your caloric intake is very important, so you have the energy to do the work.
Yes, you are such a powerhouse of knowledge that a person like me who is completely into climbing mountains can ask you so many questions, but I have taken up a lot of your time, and whatever you've said has helped me a lot and will help a lot of people who are listening here. Before we go, is there some last advice or anything you wish to say before we end this?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate it. I appreciate having a chance to interact with your audience. I think you've kind of said everything I need to say about these topics right now. But I'm happy to, we have a website, evokeendurance.com, and we have a forum on that website that will allow people to interact with me and some of our other coaches, so you can ask questions there. It's also possible if, some people have a deeper question, then they can arrange a phone consultation with me or one of our other coaches, because we're trying to get all this information out there, because we've seen it work with literally thousands of people we've been working with for years. And so we know that what we're doing works, especially for high altitude mountains. And we also know that this information is lacking. That's why, we've got the 2 books that are out there. There's all this information on the website that's free. I do my own podcasts. I started a few months ago recording a monthly session where I go through each chapter of training for the uphill athlete in a deep dive discussion of what this means. And those sessions are recorded and they're on our YouTube channel, which is, accessible via the website. So anyway, we're just trying to get all this information out there, and we are glad that people are interested.
No, and a very big thank you for affecting people like me, hundreds and thousands of people like me who had no idea how to do what we want to do. But this book came, your knowledge came, and boom, lives have changed. Big thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
Awesome. Okay, Scott, thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet.